At 19, I paid rent to live in my parents' house, while my sister lived for free, crashed cars, and got praised for waking up on time. I scrubbed floors after double shifts and handed over cash like it was the price of being tolerated. But the day they asked me to come back and help out, I realized something. I was never family. I was just the fallback plan. So I left, and now they wish I hadn't. If you've ever been the one who gave everything and still got treated like a guest in your own life, you're in the right place. Subscribe for more stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. I was 19 the first time my parents handed me a bill, a yellow slip torn from a carbon copy rent book. It listed the amount due, the deadline, and a note in my father's handwriting. This is adulthood. Time to contribute. I stared at it, heart thudding. I hadn't even finished my cereal. I remember the milk turning warm in the bowl as I held that piece of paper, trying to decide if it was some kind of joke. But the expressions on their faces, especially my mother's, calm and resolved, told me it wasn't. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were tight on money. Maybe they thought it would teach me responsibility. Maybe it was temporary, but temporary turned into monthly. The payments weren't high, $300, sometimes $400, but they carved into my part-time wages like a scalpel. I worked after classes, folded clothes at a discount department store where the manager called me kid and asked me to smile more. I'd come home to the same dinner table, the same small TV murmuring in the background, but the air had changed. Every room echoed with an unspoken contract. You live here because you pay to. My sister Hannah was 17 and still in high school. She floated through the house like a guest of honor. No chores, no curfews, no talk of rent. When she turned 18, nothing changed. No bill, no slip, no expectation. She had a flair for dramatics and a knack for needing rescuing. One week, she'd crash her car into a mailbox. The next, she'd max out a credit card and cry over it like someone had done it to her. My parents would sigh, scold her gently, and pay it off. She's still figuring things out, my dad would say, like that explained everything. As if I hadn't been expected to figure it all out from the moment I turned 19 and ate lukewarm cereal over a rent notice. I kept paying, even when it meant skipping lunch, even when it meant buying knockoff shoes and pretending I liked the style. I didn't want to argue. I thought, stupidly, that maybe if I just kept proving myself, they'd see it, that I was worth investing in too. That responsibility wasn't a burden. It was love. It was effort. But in our house, responsibility was punishment, and I was the inmate. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was the inequality carved into everything. I'd hear my mom on the phone telling relatives how independent I was, how proud she was that I stood on my own 2 feet. I was her trophy of resilience, a resilience she manufactured by withholding support. Meanwhile, Hannah's impulsiveness was romanticized. She's just spirited, my mom would say. Spirited meant spoiled. It meant forgiven before she even asked. I learned early how to hide my bitterness. It's not easy to resent someone you used to share bath toys with. I told myself she didn't ask for the favoritism, that she didn't know what it felt like to pull 5-hour shifts and come home to find her in my room, wearing my clothes, because mom said I could borrow it. I kept my jaw tight and my head down. Rent was due and the only currency I had was silence. Then came the Sunday dinner that flipped the switch. I had just gotten my acceptance letter to a local university's scholarship program. Full ride with living stipend. I came home beaming, holding the envelope like it was made of gold. My parents clapped, said good job, and passed the mashed potatoes. Hannah had just gotten hired, and temporarily, as a receptionist at a hair salon. My dad stood up, toasted her with his beer, and said, "Finally, our girl is doing something with her life." The table roared with laughter. No one toasted me. I didn't say a word. I just stared at my empty glass and felt something loosen inside me, a thread snapping silently. For the first time, I didn't want their praise. I wanted out. I didn't leave that night. I wish I could say I stood up from that dinner table, packed my things, and slammed the door with the force of my own rebirth. But it didn't happen like that. Real leaving is quieter. It starts in your chest where a slow ache begins to ferment into resolve. That night, I did the dishes like always. Hannah skipped out early, said she had plans, which probably meant getting stoned in someone's basement, and I scrubbed the pan she left in the sink like it might apologize to me if I polished it hard enough. My parents went to bed before I did. My dad with his usual grunts, my mom reminding me to turn off the lights. I sat at the kitchen table long after they disappeared down the hallway, staring at my scholarship letter again. The university logo at the top looked like a lie, a fantasy version of the life I hadn't been allowed to want. I folded the letter up slowly, careful not to crease it too much, and slid it into my bag like it was a secret I wasn't ready to share again. Over the next few weeks, I moved through the house like someone paying rent on borrowed time. The fridge still had labels with my name on containers, because God forbid Hannah respected leftovers. My laundry had to be done on certain days because her schedule was flexible, which somehow always overrode mine. I tried not to tally every injustice, but they stacked up anyway. When my paycheck was late one week and I asked for a few days' grace on the rent, my mom raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, what kind of adult doesn't plan for that?" The kind that buys her own toilet paper, I wanted to say, but I didn't. Instead, I swallowed my pride and Venmo'd her half the money. The rest I paid 3 days later after picking up a shift that had me folding jeans until my wrists ached. And when I got home, Hannah was on the couch with takeout and new shoes, claiming she needed a treat. My parents cooed over her like she'd survived a war. I started packing in stages, books first, then off-season clothes. I told them I was just reorganizing for school, and they barely looked up. I'd walk through the living room holding a box of my own life, and no one ever asked where it was going. Maybe they thought I'd never really leave. Maybe they didn't care. Or maybe they'd convinced themselves they hadn't pushed me that far. Guilt is a selective memory, after all. Hannah started dating someone around that time, a guy with a loud car and a loud laugh, who showed up uninvited and stayed too long. I came home one night to find him in our kitchen, drinking the last of my orange juice. "You must be the serious one," he said, looking me up and down like I was a spreadsheet. I didn't respond. I just took the bottle from his hand, poured the last splash into a glass, and walked away. He laughed like I was a joke, but I wasn't the one making a fool of myself. When I finally told my parents I was moving out, they blinked like I'd told them the sun wouldn't rise tomorrow. I gave them 30 days' notice, even though I didn't owe them that. I told them I'd found student housing closer to campus, which was only partly true. I had a plan, and it didn't involve coming back. My dad mumbled something about not burning bridges. My mom asked if I'd be paying rent until the day I left. That was the part that stung the most. Not the absence of goodbye or the lack of a hug. It was the reminder that to them, I wasn't a daughter. I was a tenant, a utility, someone to budget around. So I paid them one last time. I handed my mom an envelope with $300 in cash. She didn't even look surprised, just said, "Thank you for being responsible." I didn't say "you're welcome." I just walked out of the room, past Hannah and her boyfriend, past the dog that only barked when I came home late, and into the tiny bedroom I had outgrown 3 years earlier. I stared at the bare walls, the nail holes, the fading glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up when I was 13, and still thought this house was home. And I started counting down the days like someone marking the end of a sentence. The day I left, no one helped me carry a single box. My dad was in the garage pretending to fix something he hadn't touched in months. My mom hovered in the kitchen, wiping an already clean counter. Hannah was still asleep, despite it being noon. I loaded the car in silence, the kind that doesn't ask for permission or offer closure. Each trip to the trunk felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had kept on layaway. My books, my blanket, the mug no one else touched. My things, not theirs. There was no send-off, no "we'll miss you." Just the faint sound of the TV through the screen door and the smell of burnt toast. I didn't even slam the door. I just shut it quietly, deliberately, like I was closing the last chapter of a book that had stopped making sense a long time ago. My new place was small, a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom where you had to angle the shower curtain just right, or it would cling to you like a needy ghost. But it was mine. The floor creaked and the heater groaned, but I could leave dishes in the sink without getting passive-aggressive texts. I could play music past 9 p.m. without hearing, "Some of us have to work in the morning." I could exist without being measured. The first night, I slept on a futon I'd found on Craigslist and cried without really knowing why. Not from regret, there wasn't any, but from the strange weight of freedom. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and suddenly didn't know what to do with all this air. The quiet wasn't lonely, it was honest, unpolished, mine. I didn't tell many people I'd moved, just a few friends, my boss at the store, and the girl from my scholarship cohort who lived 3 doors down and brought me cheap wine to celebrate. We drank it cross-legged on the floor, between stacks of half-unpacked boxes, and a pizza that tasted better than any home-cooked meal I'd forced down out of politeness back home. She asked me why I left, and I said, because staying felt like being erased one rent check at a time. It's funny how people think leaving is the hard part. It's not. The hard part is realizing you were never really wanted the way you needed to be, that the people who should have had your back were more invested in maintaining a hierarchy than a relationship. I wasn't their child. I was the responsible one, the one who wouldn't complain, the one who could be taxed for existing. The first time my mom called, it was about a bill. She said a letter had come in my name. I told her to open it. She hesitated. "It's just junk," she finally said. "But while I've got you, have you paid your health insurance for this month?" It took everything in me not to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so on brand, it felt like parody. I told her yes, I was covered, and that she didn't need to worry about it anymore. Her silence on the other end felt longer than it was. "Okay," she said. "Well, just checking." She didn't ask how the new place was. She didn't ask if I needed anything. I could have told her about the new job I'd landed on campus, or how I'd finally found a rhythm of studying that didn't involve midnight panic attacks. But I didn't, because I was done performing daughterhood for people who didn't know how to clap. A week later, Hannah posted photos from the living room. She'd redecorated, or rather my mom had. New throw pillows, a faux fur rug, some giant LED wall art that looked like a screensaver from 2005. My old room was in the background of one picture, the door wide open, empty, stripped bare like I'd never been there. I stared at that image for a long time. It wasn't sadness I felt, it was confirmation. They weren't mourning my absence. They were repurposing it, remodeling the space where I used to keep my silence. And still, not a single "we miss you," not a "when are you visiting," not even a like on my new post, a photo of my little studio lit up by fairy lights and filled with warmth that didn't cost me my dignity. No, they weren't sad I was gone, but that didn't mean they'd never regret it. That part just hadn't arrived yet. My life started expanding in ways so subtle, I almost missed it at first. A new coffee shop around the corner became my regular spot. The barista learned my name, even remembered my order by the second week. I started saying yes to things I used to avoid: study groups, late-night walks, impromptu movie nights on someone's laptop. It felt strange, unfamiliar, to be included without needing to earn it first. No hidden strings, no side eyes if I laughed too loud or got second helpings. The scholarship program came with a mentorship component, and my assigned mentor, Camille, was everything my mother wasn't. Direct, warm, curious about my goals instead of my costs. She asked me once in a coffee shop with rain tapping on the windows what my dream looked like if I stopped playing small to make others comfortable. I froze, not because I didn't know the answer, but because no one had ever asked. For years, I'd shrunk myself into someone digestible. The reliable one, the responsible one, the one who wouldn't ask for more. But here was someone saying, "What if you did?" I went home that night and wrote my dream out in the notebook I kept tucked between textbooks. Not a grand fantasy, just a real one. Finish school, start something of my own, live in a space where I didn't need to label my milk or ask permission to feel joy. I read it back and didn't cry this time. I just nodded. It took me 3 months to stop checking my phone for messages that never came. My parents didn't reach out unless it was about mail, paperwork, or the occasional passive-aggressive reminder that I hadn't called in a while. I never called back. I responded with clipped texts, polite and sparse, like I was speaking to a landlord, not a family. Hannah never reached out at all, not even once. And that silence, at first sharp and personal, dulled into background noise. I realized I didn't miss her. I missed the version of her I'd imagined could exist, the one who might notice the unfairness, who might speak up at the dinner table and say, "She deserves better." But that version lived only in my head, and I'd already moved out of that house. Campus became a kind of home I didn't know I needed. I joined a student run journal, wrote an essay about emotional labor in families, and it got published. Camille read it and said, "This is more than just good writing. This is survival turned into clarity." I reread her email 5 times, not for praise, but because for once someone saw the weight behind the words. I stopped editing myself in conversations. I stopped pretending I was okay with things that made my stomach twist. I stopped apologizing for taking up space, literal or emotional. People noticed, they responded. It turns out, when you stop performing pain as politeness, you make room for actual connection. One night, at a small get together, someone asked if I had a close relationship with my family. I didn't flinch, I didn't lie. I said no. But I have peace, and that feels more like family than obligation ever did. They nodded, not with pity, but with understanding. That moment felt like a graduation no one could take from me. Months passed. I got a paid internship, started saving real money, bought a couch with my own paycheck, and when it arrived, I sat on it for 2 hours doing absolutely nothing, just letting the moment settle. I didn't owe anyone a thank you for it. I didn't need to explain how I could afford it. I just existed, comfortably, on furniture I chose, in a life I was finally curating with my own hands. Then came the voicemail, the one that shifted the air. My mom's voice, tight and brittle. "Hannah's having a rough time. She lost her job again. Things are complicated. We could really use your help around here. Maybe just for a while. Maybe just until things settle." I listened to it 3 times, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. Help, not for me, not from a place of concern, but because I was always the fallback plan, the insurance, the adult they never had to grow into because I did it for them. They thought I was still the girl who would come back. What they didn't know was that she had moved, and this time, she wasn't forwarding her mail. I didn't call her back, not immediately. I let the voicemail sit in my inbox like a stranger on the doorstep, uninvited, persistent, and vaguely entitled. I didn't even tell anyone about it at first. Not because I was unsure of my answer, but because I didn't want to hear the chorus of suggestions from people who confuse kindness with self-sacrifice. They're still your family. Maybe they've changed. Just for a little while to help your sister out. I had helped for a little while, then for a long while, then for too long. All it did was make them comfortable with my silence. Instead, I sat in my studio apartment with the lamp on low and watched the voicemail's timestamp fade into the background of my phone screen. I could still hear her voice in my head, that practiced mix of urgency and detachment. There was no apology tucked between the words, no ownership of the past, just an expectation that I would fold, because folding is what I used to do. So I drafted a text. Simple, director. "I'm sorry Hannah is struggling. I hope she figures things out. I won't be coming back. Take care." I stared at it for a long time before pressing send. My thumb hovered like it was waiting for some divine sign, some flicker of guilt. But it never came. Just relief. Not the cinematic kind, not a triumphant swell of music in the background. Just quiet, clean air. Space. The reply came an hour later, this time from my dad. "I don't think you understand how hard this is for your mother. No, how are you? No, we're proud of you. No, we miss you." Just a scolding wrapped in guilt. I didn't answer that one. Some messages only exist to bait old wounds. That night, I walked past the mirror in my hallway and saw myself differently. Not as a daughter or a sister or a dutiful fallback plan. Just me. Sharp around the edges, steady in the spine. The kind of woman they didn't know how to raise because she wouldn't play the part she was handed. A week passed, then another. The silence held taut and heavy, but I didn't reach for it. I kept going. My internship turned into a job offer, my first salaried position. The HR manager slid the contract across the desk with a smile that didn't feel performative. "We've been impressed with your consistency," she said. "You show up, you think critically, you lift people without centering yourself." I swallowed hard. It wasn't just a compliment, it was recognition. After I signed the papers, I sat on a bench outside the building and called Camille. She picked up on the second ring. I got the job. She didn't squeal or clap. She just said, I'm proud of you, not because you got it, because you stopped waiting for someone else to validate why you deserved it. I closed my eyes, leaned back, and let the sun hit my face like an answer I'd been waiting for my whole life. A few nights later, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize at first. It was Hannah. Her tone was saccharine and transparent, like someone playing apology by rote. Hey, heard you're doing really well. Just wanted to say congrats. Maybe we can catch up sometime. I miss you. I laughed, not cruelly, but with the kind of disbelief that comes from knowing someone only looks for you when the lights go out. She didn't miss me. She missed what I used to offer: a quiet presence, a safety net, someone to sweep up the emotional debris of her chaos without ever complaining about the cuts. I didn't respond. I put my phone down and picked up the cheap little frame I'd bought at the thrift store, the one that held a photo of me from move-in day, sitting on the floor of my apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes and half-eaten pizza. I looked young, not by age, but by hope, raw and unfinished and still bracing for a blow that never came. Now I didn't brace anymore. Now I stood up straight, and I was beginning to realize no is not cruelty. Distance is not betrayal, and freedom isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just peace that doesn't ask you to shrink. Thanksgiving came, and with it, the first invitation I'd received in over a year that wasn't about bills or borrowed help. A group text from my mother, too impersonal to be sincere, landed in my inbox like a form letter. Dinner at 6, hope you can make it. Families all coming. No punctuation, no warmth, just a brittle expectation dressed up as inclusion. I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was torn, but because I was trying to understand the strategy. They hadn't apologized. They hadn't acknowledged a single thing they'd done. But now that Hannah was struggling, that their golden girl wasn't glittering quite so brightly, suddenly they remembered I existed. Suddenly the one who left was useful again, or at least visible. I didn't reply, not immediately. Instead, I walked into my kitchen and opened the fridge. Inside was a half-baked plan: a small chicken, some vegetables, a pie crust I'd been too tired to use. I took everything out and laid it on the counter. If I was going to spend Thanksgiving anywhere, it wasn't going to be where I had to earn my seat. It was going to be here, in this tiny, imperfect apartment, with music playing softly and my feet bare on the linoleum. Alone, yes, but not lonely. Not like before. While the chicken roasted, I poured a glass of wine and called Camille. She was visiting her sister in Portland but picked up anyway. We talked about everything but family: books we were reading, the job, the coffee shop that started offering oat milk like it was a revolution. When I hung up, the silence felt like a friend, not an absence. At 6:13 p.m., another message buzzed in. Everyone's asking about you. Hannah made that cranberry thing you like. I could see it already. The performance. Hannah pretending domesticity. My mom setting a place for me that would stay empty all night, just so she could say we tried. I imagined the table, the strained conversation, the sideways glances. I imagined my seat, not truly mine, just held for guilt. An empty chair used like a weapon. I texted back 2 words: enjoy dinner. No explanation, no preamble, no apology, because I wasn't sorry, and I didn't miss them. Not really. What I missed were the ideas I had once attached to them: that family meant protection, that home was safe, that love didn't require interest. But those ideas had been hollowed out years ago, eroded with every rent payment and condescending comment. And now I was finally living without them, like someone walking without a limp they'd carried too long. The next day, my coworker Maya invited me to a Friendsgiving brunch at her place. I almost said no. Old habits, I guess, assuming I was the extra person, the burden, the one who had to prove they were worth a plate. But then I remembered, I'm not in that house anymore. I'm not a tenant of affection. I'm allowed to be wanted without having to audition for it. So I went. I brought roasted carrots with balsamic glaze and wore a deep green sweater that made me feel like I was made of something expensive. When I walked into Maya's apartment, I was met with hugs, laughter, the smell of cinnamon and coffee. Nobody asked where I'd come from. Nobody asked what I could contribute. They just said, "We're so glad you made it." I didn't cry, but later, sitting on the couch with a paper plate of sweet potato casserole, I felt something uncoil inside me. Something that had been braced for years. This wasn't my family, but it felt like love, the kind that didn't charge rent. The group went around sharing what they were thankful for. When it was my turn, I didn't say much, just, I'm grateful for spaces where I don't have to earn my place at the table. Someone clinked their mimosa glass and said, hell yes to that. The rest of the night blurred into warm lights and second servings, and by the time I got home, the old hunger, the one that used to ache for their approval, had been replaced by something quieter, satisfaction. They could keep their cranberry thing. I had something far better. A place where my absence wasn't used against me. A life where I wasn't just tolerated, I was invited. By the time spring rolled around, the version of me they remembered. The quiet one, the accommodating one, the girl who handed over rent money with trembling hands, was gone. Not burned away in some dramatic blaze, but peeled back layer by layer until what was left was sharper, leaner, impossible to ignore. The job was going well. I'd been assigned to a new project, leading a small team developing outreach for underrepresented students navigating college applications. The kind of work I would have benefited from back then, back when I was counting grocery dollars on the back of receipts. I threw myself into it, not because I had something to prove, but because I wanted to. That alone felt radical, choosing effort instead of surviving it. Recognition followed, quiet at first, a supervisor pulling me aside after a meeting to say I had presence, then an email forwarded to the department about my initiative. I didn't post about it on social media, not because I was hiding, but because my life finally felt good in private, intact without the performance. Of course, news still traveled. I got a text from my mom a week after the department head mentioned me in a newsletter. Saw your name in something Hannah's friend posted. Sounds like you're doing well. You could have told us. That was the moment it hit me. They hadn't stopped watching. They just stopped participating. I hadn't disappeared. I had just stopped being accessible. And now, watching from a distance, they were trying to stitch themselves back into a narrative they had abandoned years ago. The old me might have responded, might have softened, might have said, yeah, it's going okay. Thanks for asking. But I didn't owe them entry into a life they'd once gated. Their interest now was nothing more than curiosity dressed up in belated care. I typed and deleted 3 responses, then finally settled on the truth. I share my life with the people who saw it before it started shining. You weren't one of them. No reply came, and I didn't expect one. Instead, I got a message from Camille asking if I'd consider speaking at a panel she was organizing, a mentorship initiative featuring young professionals with non-traditional paths. You don't need to have all the answers, she wrote. You just need to speak honestly about what it cost you to build your own way. At first, I hesitated. There was still that reflex in me, that twitch of imposter syndrome that whispered, are you really someone to speak? But then I remembered every Sunday dinner I sat through with my jaw clenched, every holiday where I bought my own gifts, every time I was praised only for how little I asked for. I had paid for this voice in full. I was damn well going to use it. The panel took place in a community center near campus, not glamorous, not packed with press. Just students in folding chairs, notebooks open, trying to find something solid in a world that keeps changing its rules. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't rehearse. I just told the truth about growing up in a house that charged me rent and gave my sister free room and board. About how I left, not out of anger, but out of necessity. How I built something slower, smaller, but sturdier. How peace wasn't instant. How freedom isn't always thrilling. Sometimes it's just sitting in your own apartment, eating toast in your pajamas without justifying the cost. Afterward, a girl in the front row came up to me with teary eyes and said, thank you. I thought I was just ungrateful for wanting more, but maybe I was just the only one who noticed something was broken. I hugged her, tight, not as a speaker to an audience member, but as someone who knew exactly what it meant to carry silence so long it starts to sound like love. And as I walked home that night, under the streetlights that flickered and hummed like the city was exhaling around me, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not pride, not victory, it was something deeper, arrival, without permission, without applause. I had arrived in a life that was mine, entirely. It was almost summer when the regret finally showed up, not as a confession, not as some dramatic apology at my doorstep, but as a Facebook post. My mother had tagged me for the first time in almost 2 years. It was a photo of our old dining room table, newly polished, a vase of peonies in the center like some staged reconciliation offering. The caption read, "Nothing more important than family. No matter how far we drift, love is the anchor." An anchor, that word did it. Not because it was poetic, but because it revealed everything she still didn't understand. I hadn't drifted, I had escaped. There's a difference. One is passive, the other is survival. I didn't comment, I didn't like the post. But I watched as people I barely knew chimed in with hearts and prayers and lines like, "So true," and "Family is everything." None of them knew the truth of that table, that it was where I sat while my sister was praised for breathing and I was applauded for disappearing quietly. That table didn't symbolize love, it symbolized performance. A few days later, I got a message from my aunt, the only one in the family who'd ever acknowledged the imbalance, but never openly. Her message was short. "Your mom's been really emotional lately. She talks about you a lot. She regrets how things went." I stared at the screen, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one, just silence on the other end, that quiet plea disguised as information. I could feel what she wasn't saying. Maybe it's time to forgive. Maybe it's time to go back. But forgiveness doesn't mean walking back into a house that once held you hostage in the name of tradition. It doesn't mean pulling up a chair at a table that only ever held room for you when you brought something useful. Sometimes, forgiveness means closing a door and not checking if they locked it behind you. I replied kindly but clearly. "I'm doing well. I wish her peace, but I've built a life where I don't have to keep proving I deserve to be loved." And I had. That summer, I moved again, this time to a one-bedroom with real sunlight, a balcony with just enough space for a chair, and a plant I hadn't killed yet. It wasn't big, but it felt expansive, not because of square footage, but because it held only what I chose to let in. I painted the walls myself, ordered a secondhand bookshelf, started growing herbs in tin cans. Every detail had my fingerprints, not my mother's voice or my father's judgment, just mine. One night, while repotting a stubborn basil plant, I got another message, this time from Hannah. No flowery let-in, no fake affection, just, "I know I got things you didn't. I know it wasn't fair. I don't know what to do with that." It was the closest thing to truth I'd ever seen come from her. For a moment, I felt something flicker, not affection, but a strange sort of grief. Grief for what we could have been if she had seen me sooner, if she had ever said those words when they might have mattered. I wrote her back. "You don't have to do anything with it, just don't pretend it didn't happen." She didn't reply, and I didn't expect her to. Some truths are too heavy for people who've never carried them. I sat on my balcony that night with a cup of tea and looked out over the street. People moved below like stories I didn't need to be part of. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for their approval, not for their regret, not for them to become people I could love without caution. Because here's the thing about regret, it often arrives too late. And I was no longer accepting backdated apologies for a debt I never owed. Summer passed like a breath, the kind you take after surfacing from deep water, lungs burning, eyes wide open. I had settled into my new place. The herbs on the balcony had flourished, wild and untamed. My basil had grown thick and bushy, reaching toward the light like it had something to prove. I understood it. We were the same. Then one Friday morning, an envelope arrived, thick, cream-colored, formal. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. My mother's, neat cursive, shaped by years of church envelopes and birthday cards with blank warmth. I stood there with it in my hand for a full minute, weighing it like a bomb that had to be diffused slowly. Inside was a letter, not a note, not a card, a full letter typed, printed, signed. "We've been reviewing some things with the house. Your father and I are updating our estate documents. There's some inheritance paperwork we wanted to discuss, if you're open to it." It was absurd, really. They hadn't made room for me in their lives, but now they wanted to make room for me in their exit plan. The irony hit like a punchline. The first time they acknowledged I had value was when it could be itemized. I set the letter down on my kitchen table and stared at it over a cup of black coffee. It was always like this with them, showing up only when something needed to be smoothed, signed, or swallowed. Even their gestures of inclusion were veiled transactions. There was no mention of love, no trace of apology, just the soft language of legacy. I didn't want their house. I didn't want their money. I didn't want to inherit the coldness, the hierarchy, the years of emotional bookkeeping that counted every favor and none of the costs. I wanted peace. I already had it. Why would I trade it for a key to a house I once had to pay rent just to stay in? That night, I called Camille. I told her about the letter. I expected her to give me advice, maybe talk through the logistics. Instead, she said something that struck harder than anything I was prepared for. Inheritance isn't just about property. Sometimes it's patterns, sometimes it's pain. You don't have to accept either. That stuck with me. Not just for the day, for weeks. I started to see it everywhere, in the way I double-checked my tone when asking for help, in the way I over-apologized in work emails, in the way I still flinched when someone praised me too directly, like I had to deflect it or risk being seen as arrogant. Their legacy was woven into me, not through money or land or titles, but through hesitations, through the spaces where love should have been obvious but never was. I didn't want to pass that down to anyone, not even to the future version of me I was still growing into. So I sat down one afternoon with a legal pad and wrote my own kind of will. Not a list of possessions, but a list of things I refused to carry any further. I will not apologize for wanting more. I will not shrink myself to fit into someone else's comfort. I will not trade my peace for proximity. I will not define family by blood alone. I folded the paper, slid it into a book on my shelf, and made my decision. I sent my parents a short email, not cold, not cruel, just clean. Thank you for your letter. I've chosen not to be included in the estate planning. Please make arrangements as you see fit. I wish you well. They didn't reply. I didn't expect them to. And for once, the silence didn't sting, because now I understood what they'd never taught me. You don't need to inherit a legacy you had to survive just to leave. Sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is decline the offer, and then go build a life that doesn't need their blueprint at all. The season shifted again. The city hummed with late autumn gold, and my apartment felt warmer than it ever had. Not because of the radiator, but because everything inside it had been chosen, not inherited. I got promoted. Quietly, no fanfare. My supervisor slid the offer letter across the desk with a smile and said, "You earned this, no doubt about it." I signed it with a steady hand. The ink didn't shake. My worth no longer needed witnesses. That night, I walked home past the same corner cafe, bought myself a small slice of cake and lit a candle on my windowsill. Not for a birthday, not for tradition, just for me, a quiet celebration, the kind no one could take away. My phone buzzed once. Hannah. Hope you're good. Thought of you today. I stared at it, then let it fade to black. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some stories don't end with closure. They end with clarity. This was mine. I had left the house that charged me rent for love and built a home that gave it freely, and that more than anything was the inheritance I chose.